Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. Before we get into the topic for today, which is radical transparency, what I'd like to do is remind everybody to go into the comments, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and just let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I always like to know, where people are checking in from, and of course, if you have any questions or have any comments about anything that I bring up today during the course of the live stream, put the question, put the comment into the comments of the platform that you're watching on, and I will get the question or comment up on screen, and I will respond to it during the course of the hour. Now, what I do want to do is remind everyone that this is the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now, and you can go there and follow along. And for every single one of these Chocolate Life live streams, I put together a post. And here is the post for today's live stream. What you'll do is you'll find an overview, what it is that I'm talking about and why, and you'll also find links to resources. And some of these resources I will be talking about during the live stream. And the reason why I do this is so that you don't actually have to pay attention to links and URLs. And I'm putting them here so that they're all in one place. They're not some on YouTube and some on LinkedIn and some on Facebook. And I'm not trying to replicate them here. They're all in the same place. And so please go take a look at that. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about, I don't do this often, but I want to talk today about why I chose this particular image for the featured image for the post about today's topic. And that is that when I think about the concept of transparency, when I think about the concept of radical transparency, I think that what happens is that many companies, what they're doing is they're providing you with a window into a much larger landscape. And what they want to do is they want to focus your attention on the things that you can see through the window. And that as you come closer and closer and closer to that window, things come into better focus, that things will, as you can see here, which I represented by more saturated colors, is that, as you go away from where they want to point your attention to, that things become less clear, they become more black and white, in this case, literally more black and white. And I try very hard when I pick the images for each one of these episodes to pick an image that will reflect some of my feeling about what it is that's going on. And that's what it is that I want to achieve with this particular image. Right. Now, having gotten all the intro out of the way, the reason why I'm here today to talk about is it was something that came to me as I was looking at this particular post on LinkedIn. Now, many people will know Sharon Terenzi. She calls herself the Chocolate Journalist, as well as or she has a website called the Chocolate Journalist. She calls herself a chocolate blogger, and that she posted this she posted this topic on LinkedIn, in which she made a flat statement. Global cocoa production expected to reach 5 million tons in the 2022-23 crop year. And there are, if we go and take a look at some of the responses, what you will do is we'll find that, we have people who are saying, here's different ideas about, who has got the most cocoa, and here's some idea about, what production is. And the challenge with something like making a global statement like this is we don't actually know what the source of the information is. And one of the things that Sharon neglected to do here when she said global cocoa production is expected to reach 5 million tons is she didn't say where she got this information. Right. And I'm not singling out here. Most of the people I know, when they do this kind of stuff, will not cite their sources. Right. So the top 3 producing countries, Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Ecuador. Again, where are the sources? Ivory Coast and Ghana. I really want to know where the information is coming from. And we have a source about where cacao is coming from. We have a source of what the largest companies are. We have, what the chocolate consuming countries are and what the companies are. None of the sources for any of this information are cited. And that is what that and the ensuing conversation around, well, are the numbers that you're citing actually accurate, right? And is there some different context? So, for example, one of the bits of missing context here is that production is expected to reach over 5 million tons in the 2022-2023 crop year. What is that compared to the previous crop year, the 2021-2022 crop year? So is it gone up or has it gone down? Has it gone up a lot or has it gone down a lot? And the reason why this is important is because cocoa is traded as a commodity, and therefore what's happening to prices. So for example, we have seen recently that the price of cocoa is going up, right? There is reporting, and we'll get to some of that reporting, that there's going to be a serious shortfall in production this year. So are the two, is this 5 million tons a lot more or a lot less than last year? And is that affecting the price of cocoa? So just having these statistics in isolation, right, doesn't really present a real usable picture of the situation that's going on, because there's no context for any of these things, and we actually can't go and fact check any of these things. So there was a response to this. We'll see. Again, I'm scrolling past this. What you can do is a gentleman by the name of Paul McNamara, who's a professor at the University of Urbana-Champaign, at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, posts this link from the world, not a link from the World Atlas, but so we have a link and it just points to the homepage of the World Atlas, right? And it has an embedded image, right, of some things, but we don't actually have the post to the page. I found the actual post to the page. Right. So rule number one, if you are going to be posting links, actual post to the links to the source, don't post to the homepage if I actually have to go and find something. Because in order to find this page, you actually have to type in top cocoa producing countries in order to be able to find it. Otherwise, you may or may not find the page. So it requires a very, very specific search request in order to get there. So what we do is we have a description of the top 10 cocoa producing countries in the world from World Atlas. I don't know anything about the bona fides of this organization, but one of the things that I go and take a look at is at no place, right, do they actually talk about the sources where they get this information. So we can go through each one of the countries, we can scroll down to the bottom. There's nothing about where this information comes from. So, hey guys at World Atlas, how do I know about the veracity of the statistics that you're presenting, and why should I agree with you as opposed to anyone else? I also have, this just really interesting aversion, something that I learned, right? So what we're doing here is when we look at production statistics for Cote d'Ivoire, what we have is we have 2,200,000, to 3 zeros in the last 3 significant decimal places, right? And the same thing is true of Ghana. But when we go to Indonesia, we're actually at the 1 significant decimal place. They're actually exactly 739,483 metric tons. How did we get to 3, right, 1, 5? I mean, for me, this is an indicator that that the fact that this is exactly 3 zeros and this is exactly 3 zeros and this is exactly 3 zeros says there's something going on in the reporting that are rounding up or rounding down that we need to go take a look at. And from a statistics perspective, that would be something that I would go and take a look at, right? And what that says is the next point that we can go and take a look at when it comes to looking at these statistics is which set of statistics are we going to go and use? And one of the reasons why I talk about that, and this is something that I learned when I was doing a talk last summer when I was in Brazil, when I was at the Chocolate Xingu, which is in Altamira, which would have been last July. I was asked to be given a talk. I was to give a talk about global production. And one of the challenges that I had was, so I looked at here, I looked at the 2021 International Executive Service Corps / USDA Global Cocoa Markets Study. And what they had done is they had done a meta-analysis of several other studies, and they came up with this, right? And in it, I said, okay, the 2021 harvest, we can see that, is 5.5 million metric tons according to ICCO, which says if we look at this article from Sharon, that 5 million metric tons in the 2022-2023 crop year, what we might find is that the 2021 crop year was significantly lower. And so it provides some context for what it is that's going on. Again, not cited, and we don't even know if these are ICCO numbers, right? So we need to figure that out, right? So what we find is that what I did is that the reason why I'm using 2016 and 2019 production in this table is that those are the 2 years that are in the IESC study, right? It made a whole lot of sense to quote what it is within the IESC study. And what we find is Ivory Coast, Ghana, Indonesia, Nigeria, Ecuador, Cameroon. So in 2021, 5.5 million metric tons. We find that in 2019, we find that the order is very, very different, right? We find that Ivory Coast between 2016 and 2019 went up, that Ghana went down, that Indonesia went up, that Nigeria went up, that Ecuador went up. And we can see here, right, the increases in production. So I've got, so we can at a glance see within this one study, right, what the differences in production are. So this is really important. Now, the next thing I did was I actually took a look at 3 different countries where I knew that there was a lot of government intervention. I was at the 2010 Second International Congress in fine flavor cocoa in the Andean region in La Paz, Bolivia. I was a speaker there. And what I was able to do is I was able to grab another set of numbers. And what I found was that in the 2006 numbers, I'm using FAO stat numbers. So this is the Agricultural Organization of the UN. And I also grabbed numbers from ICCO, from AnaCacao. AIPC is the Brazilian Cocoa Producers Association. And so what I was able to do here was able to go and grab a longer historical context, right? And this is the way that presenting numbers, in my opinion, should be done, right? If you just present a number like this, right, it's a number, we don't know anything about where that number came from. Right. And I think that's really, really important when we're going out there talking about cocoa and chocolate, is to be able to say, okay, here's where the numbers came from, right? And to provide some context. Because we also find that if we go here and Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Ecuador, right, what we find is that in 2019, it was Ivory Coast, Ghana, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Ecuador. And Ecuador went from 85,000 metric tons of production in 2006 to 283,000 metric tons of production in 2019. I know from my visit there last year that it's more than 100,000 metric tons of production, so it's over 350,000 metric tons of production in Ecuador, according to AnaCacao, which is the National Cacao Producers Association. So we really do need to understand where these numbers are coming from. And that is part of what I think of as radical transparency. We know that there are, the old phrase, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. And so the question becomes, when we're reporting numbers, what numbers we're reporting, why are we reporting, why have we chosen these particular numbers? Now, the other thing that's really interesting about the Brazilian numbers is that these numbers from the IESC USDA study, right, do not actually map directly to what the Brazilian Cocoa Producers Association reports. I don't have those numbers at the top of my head. I just remember that they are very, very different, right? But I do remember that, what we find is that in 2015, according to the ICCO Fine and Flavor Cocoa report, what we do is we find that 0% of the cocoa from Brazil in 2015 was considered to be fine flavor cocoa. The exports were considered to be fine flavor cocoa. What we do is we find that in 2020, 100% of the exports were fine flavor cocoa. That's really, really good. But we might ask ourselves the question, why is that the case? And it turns out there are 2 reasons why that's the case. Number one is that in 2015, Brazil was not a member of ICCO, and therefore their exports were not reported as a part of the the ICCO stats. So very, very simple. The reason why it's 0% is that Brazil was not an ICCO member. The reason why it's 100%, not the reason why it's 100%, but one reason why it's 100% is that total exports of cocoa out of cocoa beans, total exports of cocoa beans out of Brazil in 2020 only amounted to about 600 metric tons. And so that's a contributing factor to the fact that 100% of exports were fine and flavor cocoa. And interestingly to note is we find this 21% increase between 2016 and 2019, and this is being done without a lot of government intervention. So we know the government of Colombia, government of Peru, the government of Ecuador, just like just invested quite heavily in the cocoa sector. That's not true of Brazil. Just wanted to provide some context to be able to get to some idea of radical transparency, right? So giving you an idea of the little bit of homework that I have done and how I think that when we report about statistics, we need to provide some context in terms of what we're doing. So this is, so the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, and so the link to this page is here. The link to this page is, let me click out of this. The link to this page is here, or it will be. It's not here yet, but it will be after the live stream is over. But what I have done is I've gone to take a look and said I want to look at, for example, just the country of Ivory Coast. What I want to do is I want to look at cocoa production, so just cocoa beans. I want to look at cocoa beans. I want to look at area, yield, production quantity, stocks, right? I don't need producing animals slaughtered, right, because it's not relevant to this discussion. And then I want to look at the years. And one of the great things about the FAO Stat database is that it has results going back to 1961 for many things, for many countries. And so when I get the results here, right, what I can do is, excuse me, I just deselected something. So what I need to do is I need to show the data. What I'm doing is I'm getting all of this information about the Ivory Coast from 1961 to the most current reporting year, 2021, I believe, right? And so I have here cocoa beans, areas harvested, and from 19, so I can then go past the area harvested, right, to yield, and I can. This is really, really detailed, right, as you might imagine. And so you can export this into an Excel spreadsheet. You can sort the data very differently. And so you can get a very, very good, you can then go graph all the changes in this. And so you have an understanding. So is the FAO stat database the best database in the world? I don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is that the way they report, so for example, they say, this is an estimated value as opposed to an actual recorded value. That's really, really important to know, right? So there's lots of things in here that we can say, okay, I have consistent reporting methodology. They appear to be going to the same places to get the data, and they seem to be reporting it in a similar kind of way. But keep in mind, the way that Ivory Coast reports their data is going to be different from Ghana reports their data, is going to be different from other countries report their data. And so you have the ability here to be able to understand what that means. So it's a good baseline that we can look at, and we've got lots of data from lots of years, right? So this is it. I mean, it's one that I've referred to. I've downloaded this table many, many times and done lots of analysis on it. We go to the ICCO database, and one of the statistics they do have that's really, really nice is that you can download the daily cocoa price from 2023, from yesterday. You can download back into the 1980s. So I can get the daily cocoa price for the last 25 years, 35 years. So that's really useful if what I were to do is I were to take the annual production statistics and then were to be able to go and do the daily cocoa price, So I can combine them in the same table, or I can run a query if they're in different tables, and I can say, how has the price of cocoa changed over the period of time? Really, really interesting. Now, this is the ICO database. I have the daily cocoa prices. I can also get the monthly average cocoa prices if I don't want to deal with all the data. And from the monthly average prices, I could actually compute annual average prices fairly simply in Excel. Right now, I can go and compare that with another set of statistics. So I have the ICO prices. I can go and look at the exchange prices and say, okay, but the nice thing about it is I've got the 52-week high and the 52-week low. And now all of a sudden, there's a lot more information. And these are the futures contracts. So these are, again, from 1980 until 2023. Right. And so now I have another set of really, really important data that I can take with that I can compare with the FAO stats. Now, one of the things that I am really, really disappointed by is that when I go to the ICCO databases, and I only have a monthly market report, right? So I don't have the same level of detail in production from ICCO, right, that is reported that I have with prices, right? And I'm not entirely sure why that is, right? But I don't have a tabular data. I only have some graphs, and I can't get the actual quantities. I have to infer what it is that's going on, and I don't know why. Again, ICCO is not providing the same level of detail with its production statistics as it does with its pricing statistics. But I think it's a real failure of ICCO as an organization not to provide that data. I mean, they should be able to have it for each one of the countries that is a signatory, is a member of ICCO, and because they're not being transparent. I mean, they're not being transparent about what they're doing. There's some reason that they want this data and they're presenting it only in aggregate. And because they're presenting it this way, I mean, I have to go to each PDF file independently. I mean, and look at, they're actually using different graph styles to do this. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff that's going on here that makes it really, really difficult to understand what it is that's going on. All right. And I wish that I had production data from ICO on a monthly basis, or a monthly basis by country that I could, or an annual basis by country that I could, in tabular format, like I can get at the pricing data, right? Just because that provides us such a really, really interesting context that's important. So I can get more pricing data. Again, this is just pricing data. It's not actual production data. I don't know that there is actually a place where I can get good production data for free on the internet. Maybe if I was a big company and I had access to it, or maybe if I was a big company, was a member of ICCO, as a member, I might be able to get access to the data. And I really should talk to Michelle Arion, whom I met, who's the president of ICO at the moment, about why that is the case, why we don't get that data. I will go and do that. So one of the other things that's needed here, and again, this is publicly available data, is what is the exchange rate data? So for example, here on the statistics, I have the price in pound sterling, the price in US dollars, right? I've got the New York futures price, the London futures price, and the daily's price. But here I have pound sterlings, here I have US dollars, here I have euros, right? And I could compute an exchange rate from these. But what I want to do is I want to say is, okay, here is an independent exchange rate on any given day from the US dollar to the pound sterling, from the pound sterling to the US dollar. You want the central bank exchange rates. So that what you could do is that you could say, if I purchase X amount of cocoa denominated in US dollars, right, I could say, here's what the price was in euros or pound sterling. And this is really, really important because what we'll do, for example, if we were to go to the Tony's Chocolate Only annual report, what they call their fair report, one of the things they do is sometimes currency is denominated in US dollars, and sometimes currency is denominated in euros, right? And we don't know what the exchange rates are at any given time, and that, depending upon when a transaction occurred, the price might be very different, right? And so that's really important. So we don't know what the exchange rate is. I just looked it up. £1 sterling today is roughly worth $1.29 US, right? And that fluctuates up and down. But you can imagine that if it goes between 124 and 131, that that's there's a fair amount of margin. And if you're playing not only the futures market with cocoa, but you're also hedging the foreign exchange market, you can hide a lot of money in the differences. So that's why I think it's really important that if we're doing anything related to reporting, that we know on what day the transaction occurred and when what the exchange rate was, so that we can understand what the prices were going across the community. Now here's a new site that I hadn't known before until I ran across this post. There was a comment here pointing to AFEX, and I'm sort of really interested in following up and figuring out what AFEX is going to be doing and what it might mean for the exchanges, because historically cocoa has been put on the New York and London exchanges. So really important to understand how a new exchange might have an impact on that. So this is AFEX, the African exchange. And here's their report. I'm going to put a link to this page on the post for the Chocolate Life, this live, so you can get an idea about what it is they're talking about. So here we have a different number, 5.26 million tons, right, as opposed to 5 million tons. But that's an average since 2014. We don't actually have any of the numbers for any of the countries that contribute to this. So again, from a transparency perspective, we still need to do a lot of work to understand what the numbers that roll up into this. But it's a different perspective, and you need to go read this report and understand. Again, there are graphics, but none of the underlying data in a table, which we could grab and run different analyses on, which is, again, I think a limitation of all of these reports. So again, all right, why do we need to take a look at this, right? Because here is an article from Confectionery News. It was from yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I'm trying to keep on top of this as I'm putting together the content for the live stream. And it says that chocolate makers report a slowdown of production as margins become squeezed by inflation. And they're not really talking about inflation here per se, although that is part of it. What they're talking about is the fact that the price of cocoa is going up, and how the price of going up, right, is the factories are cutting back as high cocoa prices squeeze margin, just as inflation hurts consumer pockets. So there is this pressure coming from two different places. It's increased price of cocoa and inflation, which means that people have reduced purchasing power. So just so you know, there are a couple of things. Number one, so they've got a couple of things. So I says, according to the Cocoa Association of Asia, really good, but not a link to where this data are coming from, where the data is coming from, data are, right? So I would really like this, because I have to go and research where this data are coming from. And then the ECA, the European Cocoa Association, I have no idea where these figures are coming from. I have no way to independently validate them. This is not being transparent. This is a matter of reporting and choosing how to source your reporting. And I think that this is a challenge that everybody who is in the industry who's talking about this stuff has, is about how to source the reporting. All right, so we say analysts fear the latest figures could have an impact on the $117 billion global chocolate industry. And this is chocolate, not only chocolate bars, but chocolate confectionery and chocolate used in baking and chocolate used in ice cream. So just, you know, it's an all-encompassing kind of figure, in which Bloomberg saw sales volume slip for the first time in 6 years in 2022, citing data from Euromonitor. Again, Bloomberg, we don't have a link to the report, and then we also don't have a link to the source from Euromonitor International. We have to go and look at it, you know, and see if the information is available. Now, I want to say the demand issues are multifold, says Judy Gaines, who is a source for the Bloomberg article. Yay, we have a source for the Bloomberg article. I happen to know Judy personally, and have known her for, I want to say, almost 15 years. I can personally attest that she does a good job of her due diligence. And so if she's talking about something, because I know her personally, right, I am happy to say her observation, it's not just cocoa prices, but sugar prices are high. So this, chocolate makers report slowdown, but they're talking about, they've got a picture of cocoa beans, but what we're finding is it's not just cocoa, it is sugar. And what's important here is that we find that the difference between 21 production or 2021, 2022, and 2022, 2023, the differences in production going from 5.5 million tons down to 5 million tons is a part of that, right? But we also find is that there have been some very, very large trades where it looks like there are some people who are looking to influence the market prices. So prices are going up, right? But as we discussed in a live stream last week, we don't actually know what the changes are indexed for inflation. So how are the prices? I mean, are the prices going up at a pace which matches if they were adjusted for inflation, yes or no? Right. So it's interesting to have that bit of data. And so if I've got production statistics from FAO, I got price statistics from ICO, I've got price statistics from an independent source, I have exchange rate data. If I actually had inflation rate data, what I can now do is I can now do some analysis and understand, oh, if I can do this for sugar, I can go to the FAO stat database and get production for sugar, right? And not just cane sugar, but beet sugar. And I can now start having an understanding. I can then go get daily prices for sugar. And now I can get an idea about, is there a relationship between sugar and cocoa, and have an understanding. Because right now, we don't have enough information, and this being a point about radical transparency, we don't have enough information in order to be able to understand what the influences are. We only know what it is that we reported and what goes on here. So Confectionery News, they're citing themselves, which is, I understand if they wrote an article about them. So chocolate makers are already suffering higher cocoa prices, jumping 2022 in the London market this year. We can look at this article, and sorry, it's taking a little while to load. I'm not certain why it's not loading. But anyway, we have an explanation here for what is going on. So, we understand that it's weather, right, which is pushing up the prices. Interesting to know. I thought I was logged in, so I should be able to read this, but you get the idea. We can go find out what it is. So this is not something, why are high cocoa prices squeezing margins, right? Maybe it has to do with reduced production. 5 million metric tons seems like a lot, but it's 10% down from last year. And some of that can be attributed to weather. But what we find in the market report, that the market has experienced consecutive years of supply deficit. So, but we don't actually have, they're talking about the June 2023 market report. There's actually not a link to the market report. We actually have to know to go to ICCO. We actually have to know where to find the market reports and things like that. So, again, not radical transparency here. There's a lot of work that we need to do in order to understand what these numbers are from. And then we need to know a lot about different kinds of contracts. And then we need to understand about the prices from on the London exchange. But, right, in London, why are the prices here quoted in US dollars instead of pounds sterling, right? Well, in New York, they're in US dollars to US dollars. So how much of this difference might be to do an exchange rate, right? I don't know the answer to that question. So from a radical transparency perspective, it's really, really challenging, right? So these are the challenges that we face when somebody just reports a number. When somebody just reports a number that says, oh gosh, 5 million metric tons. Where does that number come from? What are the implications of that number? Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Ecuador, according to whom? Which source says these are the 3 largest producing countries? Is there a change from this year according to last year? We don't know the answer to that question. This is 5 million metric tons, 5.5 the year before. How has it changed? I mean, these are really, really important things to know and to understand when it comes to radical transparency, understanding what transparency means in terms of reporting. So before I go to the next point, what I want to do is do a really quick reset. You're watching The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. Today's topic is radical transparency, and we're talking about some of the reporting issues which make transparency, reporting about transparency, really, really a challenge. Whether you call them transparency reports or sourcing reports or fair reports, whatever language you might use. Right? If you're watching today on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, you're watching live, please go into the comments. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. And if you have a comment or question about anything that I have to say here, put it into the comments as well, and I will get it. I will try to answer it before the end of the hour. I'm working from this post on The Chocolate Life. Here is the post for today's live, where I set up the episode overview, and then I've got a whole bunch of resources. Not all of the resources are there yet. I will put them in when I get done today. So I want to talk next about transparency reports. And I'm going to be picking uncommon cacao because I've actually done a deep dive analysis on this particular, the 2018 pricing report. So this 2018 pricing report you can get from their 2018 transparency report. I'll put a link to this in today's post, and you can scroll down and here's a table. So what I just did is I did a print of this table. Right. And so what we have here in the 2018 transparency report, what Uncommon Cacao printed was they said, who's their supply partner? This little asterisk lets you know that this is actually a subsidiary of Uncommon Cacao. Very, very good. So they're getting a lot of cocoa from cooperatives and organizations that they support and they own or have an ownership position to some extent. That's important to know. Right? So they said, here's the partner, the origin, Maya Mountain, less helpful because, in this particular case, we know Cacao de Colombia is in Colombia, but you have to know that Maya Mountain is in Belize and Oco Caribe is in the Dominican Republic. You have to know that Abokva is in Africa and things like that. So again, not a huge deal, but it's really, really important. So what they've done here is they said, oh, cool, the average farm gate price over all of 2018, we assume, of just two countries, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, is $1.36 farm gate price. But it turns out that here we have Guatemala, and here we have Belize, and here we have the Dominican Republic, and only a small percentage of their cacao is sourced from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And so this probably artificially deflates the farm gate price, just to let you know, in my opinion. So I would actually like to know what the ICCO annual price was, or we had in particular here, we've got the 52-week high and the 52-week low. We have the ranges. I could go to this site and I could get that information, but I don't have it. So this particular, here is the Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire price. Here's the average commodity export price. Now, keep in mind that the export price is not the farm gate price. And so this is the commodity export price, but it's not limited to Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. So right now we're comparing apples and oranges. So even though it looks like we have all this data here, right, it turns out that we don't have numbers that we can compare with. This $3.07 farm gate price, right, and this $5.66 export price, we don't know how it compares with just the Ghana Cote d'Ivoire. So there's no one-to-one association here. It is helpful. It is better than nothing, but we don't actually really have a good understanding of what the prices are. Right. So, but what is useful here to understand is that we have an average farm gate price. We have the average export price. So in this particular case, we go from $3.07 to $5.66. So there's roughly $2.60, which represents the cost of getting it from the farm onto a container, right? So that's it. There's another roughly $1 per kilo. Actually, I take that back. It's only about 40 cents per kilo to transport it from there to an Uncommon warehouse, and then they sell it from somewhere between $7.20 to $8.80 per kilo. Right. So what we can do is we can actually take these numbers, put them into spreadsheet, and because they actually have the volume that they produce, we can get an idea about how much business Uncommon does. Right. So really, really interesting. But these are average prices, and this is a range of prices, and so we have some challenges in terms of understanding exactly what the impact is going to be. Just to know what's going on. And so what we will actually find is we have a 229 price here, right? So what we'll find is that, yeah, this Ghana price or this Abokfa price, the average farm gate price was $1.36. They have $1.49 here, so it's not a huge increase. So it's not even the fair trade premium, really, increase in terms of what goes on. You get the idea for how to go. We need to go look at this. The reason why I want to go and spend so much time here on the 2018 list is because number one is I actually went in and copied all the data out of the spreadsheet and out of this and put it into a spreadsheet and actually did all of these analyses. You can find out what their minimum operating income was, their maximum operating income was, right? So there's lots of reasons. And the reason why I'm talking about this is, we talked about this company Equal Profit, which wants to make sure that profits are distributed more equitably up and down the supply chain. What we can get from this reporting is we can get an idea of maybe where revenues were. And then we get an idea, if we could get an idea of what costs are, we could start talking about an idea of what profits are, right? And so I wanted to bring this up specifically because we had this discussion with people in Equal Profit in a previous live stream. Now, let's go take a look at the 2019 report. So all of a sudden, we don't have the table data. What we do is we have a color-coded graph, right? Which is, right, we got $1 to $2. So these are big price jumps, right? And then we have an average price here, but we don't actually have any easy way to go and make this direct comparison as we did here, right? So we have graphs. The graphs don't tell us a whole lot, right? It talks about transparent trade. It's verifiable. Publishing the pricing for every transaction, okay? So so if anybody from Uncommon, Emily, anybody from Uncommon is here, I would like to know where you publish the price for every transaction. I would like to know for every transaction along the supply chain in any year you care to name where all of this data is published, and then I can get access to it. If I can get access to it for multiple years, I would be happy to do the analysis on it to understand what it is that's going on, right? Including, so absolutely, I think that's a great idea, right? To do it, I would like to see the data because we don't have it here, right? And if I go and take a look at the 2019 report, I actually don't see a link anywhere. And this is actually a thing about most of these PDFs is I can embed links, so I should be able to point to specific places on the internet where I can get at this data, right? And actually get the data that they're talking about. So please, I haven't been able to find it. I would like to know where it is. If anybody knows where it is, you can DM it to me. You can email it to me. You can put it in the comments. I would like to go and find it. So, but there are some other really, really interesting things here. So number one is that they actually don't mention 2019 on this page. So, I mean, I had to put it on here. We're in this context. I could take this page out of context and I wouldn't know where 2019 was. We now have all of the data about who the cooperatives were. It's completely, here, we know who the cooperative is or the supply partner is. We know their relationship to Uncommon Cacao, whether they're a subsidiary or not. All of that is gone here. And what we need to do is we need to go from page to page to page. And so some of the data that's in the table, we now need to go and, it's here, right? And we now need to go and very, very painstakingly go and figure out what the data are. And it turns out that the information which is on these pages is not actually identical from page to page to page. And so we've just made the challenge of trying to figure out what the data means very, very much, much harder than it needs to be. Radical transparency? I don't think so. Is it transparent trade? If all of this was available in an Excel spreadsheet, every single transaction, the price paid for every single transaction, that's a start. But what I would like to know is, what was the price of cocoa on that day, and what was the exchange rate? So, if I'm sitting here and I've got this in, I would like to know what the local currency was, how much I paid in local currency, what the exchange rate was to get from the local currency into US dollars, right? All of these things, or if I paid in US dollars, what did it mean in terms of local currency? Really, really important when it comes to the idea of radical transparency, right? Really, really important. And so again, equal profit, I mean, this is, I think, some of the things that you're going to want to be able to talk about and be able to show in terms of, who you're, what you're doing in terms of giving people the confidence that the numbers you're reporting actually reflect reality. So we've gone from this in 2018 to this in 2019. This is a huge step backwards, separating all the data out, not providing a single place that we can go and find it. I don't know how many people are going through and going and looking at every single page and going and getting the data from each one of these pages. So again, here we have Oko Caribe, we've got farmer impact and biodiversity, and then we have farmer impact and biodiversity, right? But then we've got farmer impact and farmer impact. We're not reporting the same things in the same ways. It just makes it really, really difficult to understand what it is that's going on. And so what's interesting about this is we go to the 2021 pricing report, really, really difficult to see, right? And here what we do is we find the supply partner. They've addressed the issue of, okay, we say here's Peru and here's Colombia. Yay, now we know the country, right, for each one of these places that we didn't know before. Really, really happy that they did that. They got the farm gate price, the association price, the FOB price, and the average sales price. So we no longer have a range of sales prices. So we just have the average of those sales prices. So there's less information, less transparency, right? And we no longer know the quantities involved, right? So while this is a step forward in some respects, it is a step backwards in other respects, right? And one of the other ways in which it is it is a step backwards is that what we no longer have here is this indication of farm gate price and commodity export price. So we don't actually have any idea of what the comparison is And I think that in terms of radical transparency, understanding what the fair trade floor is going to be and what a fair trade premium might be would be great bits of information to have along with this. I mean, we can get that separately and put it into a table and aggregate it. We can do that. But they've gone from a step backwards. I actually also haven't looked at the report closely enough because they use a technical term here, SIF, which is cost, insurance, and freight, as opposed to FAB. So how does landed, so they use landed when they talk about this Utenes Bolivia. To talk about landed, how is landed different from SIF? If these are SIF and FOB, they've just raised questions about things and they haven't answered them here. I would really like to know what it means. And so this is one of the challenges when it comes to the notion of radical transparency in cocoa reporting, right? Even one company from year to year can change the way they're reporting. And Uncommon is one of the best. I mean, kudos for this amount of detail, because I don't know of another small cocoa supplier that is providing the level of detail that Uncommon is providing across this, right? You go from here to here, right? And this is a huge step backwards when it comes to transparency and reporting. We've just lost a lot of information. People will go there. Will they read all the detail in the the ensuing however many pages there are in the report? Don't know the answer to that question. But it's a challenge here. This is a step back, right? We're doing a step forward in 2 years in the future, right? Where we've got more detail, but we actually have a lot less detail in really, really important respects compared with the 2018 report, right? And this is a challenge in radical reporting. Now, what can we do? So if we go and take a look, I'm going to really quickly. I don't always do this. So we've got the Equal Profit website, and so let's go and talk about the certified products in cocoa. Right. So what are some of the things that we might do when it comes to certified products? Well, so we'd find that Unión y Progreso is, I believe, in Ecuador. So it's part of Unicase, which is in Ecuador. And then Ecuatoriana de Chocolates is in Ecuador as well. I'm not, Banyan Alliance, I believe, is in Switzerland. And then One Action is a Geneva NGO. So one way in which we can move towards radical transparency is that in Ecuador, every single commercial transaction is accompanied by a receipt that is filed by the federal government. So for example, if you were to go to Cocoa Supply, who's a collaborator with The Chocolate Life, and you were to ask the people at Cocoa Supply to say, can you provide me with the receipts for the cocoa that is in the products that I purchase from you, they would say, yes, here are the receipts. And what you could do is you could actually go to an online database and you can go from the receipt numbers and actually get an idea about what the actual amount was paid, right? And this is a really, really interesting idea, right? That I think that if it exists in other countries, that there is a receipt and you can get that receipt because it's filed there for tax purposes, right? That you get your hands on it. And this would be every single producer, every single supplier should be willing to be able to provide these kinds of receipts as a part of what they're doing. Ask for them. Understand, okay, here's what it is that we paid to the farmer or to the cooperative, right? So we know what it is backed up by a receipt, which is required by the government and is filed for tax purposes. So just thinking about that, this is what we want. This is what we want to do. When you talk to your suppliers, can you get a hold of the actual receipts for what it is they paid? Yes and no. But from a radical transparency perspective, I think that would be a really good idea. And then also with it, from a radical transparency perspective, you want to know what the daily closing price for cocoa was on the exchanges. You want to know what the foreign exchange rate was on the day you made the transaction, so that you can go and start comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges and not figs to persimmons, because I think that's what it is that we have here. We have something which is so radically different. And there's a lot of range in the figures that when we start talking about, when we start talking about all these little differences in terms of prices, that a lot can get lost, right? In terms, there's a lot of leeway and a lot of room for fudging, right, in what's going on. And so what I would like to personally see in any kind of transparency reporting system is to go and get at that level of detail, so that there is a database where we know what all the transactions cost and we know what all this ancillary data is, right, related to financial circumstances, the financial situation around every individual transaction. At that point, we can start doing something meaningful, right? But until we have all that data in a consistent place, in a consistent format, in an accessible place, in a consistent format that we can all agree is canonical, we're all going to use it as the reference, we have a problem with anything that is associated with transparency reporting. Because, as I pointed out, at the very, very beginning of the live stream, let me get rid of this, is that this is my view of what transparency reports are, right? Which is right? The person who is putting together the transparency report or the fair report, whoever it is, said, okay, this is what we want you to be focusing on. We want you to be focusing on all this stuff that you can see through this little tiny window here, right? There's this big universe of things that are happening outside this window, right? And as you get closer and closer to the window, we're going to give you more detail, in more clarity, with more color. In this color is going to relate to the information that you can use for storytelling, right? The information you have around it. But as you move away from here's what we want you to focus on, here is this the part of the story we want you to take a look at, right? That things become less colorful and they go to black and white and things become grayer. Again, as a metaphor for might we be being selective about what it is that we're reporting, right? I want to be really, 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 really careful in understanding that this is my position here, is that transparency reporting can be summarized by the metaphor which is in this particular image. Now, if what we can do is we can get from a radical transparency perspective. I mean, one of the challenges we all have is how do we know we can trust what it is that's going on? I mean, could a particular organization be co-opted, right? And one could make the example that institutionalized fair trade, Fair Trade International, used to be FLO, has been co-opted by Big Chocolate and other big organizations, and their reporting is not symmetrical. There's a lot of requirement to report up the chain. There's not nearly the concomitant responsibility to report down the chain. So you have a single point of potential influence, and we need to be really careful about that. What I would do as a part when it comes to radical transparency would be to suggest that there is an agreed upon format for how these transparency reports, and when I'm talking about the transparency reports, the way this information is reported, right? So, we've got a spreadsheet, we got this, right? It's down at the individual transaction level, right? So we know what the individual transactions were with all this other data. And then what happened is that you had the accountant that was preparing your tax returns be able to produce a document which would essentially certify that the data that are being presented were presented as a part of a government required tax audit, a tax return, and so that the data, as far as they know, are correct and true. And what that does is it says there's no single point of failure. That not most companies have an accountant which is different from most other companies, and so there's no way to collude on these things. An interesting way to think about radical reporting, as far as I'm concerned, radical transparency reporting. With the point being is that until we have that level of detail, until we have a consistent reporting format, until we really understand what the context, not just of what was paid at the farm gate, but what is the financial situation, right, which surrounds each particular transaction. What's the price of cocoa on the exchanges? What are the exchange rates in all the different currencies that we're talking about? So if I'm doing this in Colombian currency, I need the conversion from Colombian pesos into US dollars, into euros, and into pounds on the same day, right? And I don't want to convert from one currency into another because that doesn't give me, because the exchange rates are not uniform across them. So we really do need to understand what all these things are if we're going to get to an understanding of what the market is all about. And the last thing I'm going to say about this is that on last Friday, what we did is we talked about the Fine Chocolate Industry Association, and we talked about their glossary, right? And I left at the end saying that I believe the fine chocolate industry. I believe in a lot of what it is that the FCA is doing. I disagree in how they do it, but I also understand that they're a small organization. They are chronically underfunded, and that it's mostly a volunteer operation. And so what they've done is they've done this huge effort to create a glossary. I mean, and we talked about that um, last week, what I think are the issues associated with the glossary. But what we can do is we can see that as a part of what they're doing, they're promoting is not just industry standards, but a code of ethics and some information about transparency. This is where I think the FCIA actually would be better off in and have greater impact in putting their resources. If they could, among themselves as a group, and their members include very small companies and very large companies, if what it is that they could do is come up with a standard transparency reporting format. So if you are an FCIA member and you want to call your product transparent, this is how you must report about it. We must know X and Y and Z about the finances that are going on, and the FCA could maintain databases of pricing and exchange rate data that they could get access to, right? So what they say is transparency. We believe in transparent label and marketing, right? The goal is to keep labels, ingredients, and marketing messages accurate and not make claims that cannot be supported, right? And I think that doesn't go nearly far enough, right? That if the FCA really wanted to make an impact on the industry, that what they could do is work among their members to create a radical transparency reporting format. That if their members, and some of them are huge thought leaders, Dandelion is in there, Cho is in there, Guitard is in there. There are some companies that are real thought leaders in this space, right? And they've got ecom, so Atlantic Cocoa, which is part of ecom, so they have some of the bigger companies in the world that are part of this as well, that if they could get this transparency reporting format, and they could actually, I think, have a greater impact on the way the world of cocoa and chocolate are reported and the data that we have in order to be able to go about making sense of what the world of cocoa is, so that we understand what it means to be transparent about pricing, and understand exactly where in the supply chain profit is being made, where profit is it being equitably distributed across the supply chain, and what the difference are from country A to country B to country C to country D, and from different models, what are the big cocoa brokerages doing as opposed to the smaller specialty brokerages firm. I mean, we've got a company like Darnhauer, which has got a specialty brokerage and a commodity brokerage operation. That's also true of ecom with Latitude. There's a lot of information that could be done. And Cacao Latitudes is a member of the FCA. There's a lot of information that can be gained. And fundamentally, one of the challenges we have about making good decisions about change is we actually don't have the data that are required in order to make good decisions, right? And that's why I think radical transparency of the kind that I'm talking about is an absolute requirement in order to be able to effectuate meaningful change in the world of cocoa and chocolate going forward. With that, I want to point out that this episode of The Chocolate Life Live is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. If you are not yet a member of The Chocolate Life, you can go to TheChocolateLife.com, and I'm logged in. So it says account up here, but if you were to go in and you're not logged in, it would say join. Click and join. You can join as a free member. There's a premium membership if you have some. I don't do Patreon. I don't run ads. This is the way the Chocolate Life Live is supported, is through your contributions. And even if the contribution is just becoming a member and receiving emails on a regular basis, I appreciate all of that. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video. If you can, throw something into the comments. All that helps the algorithm. Subscribe to the Chocolate Wire channel. If you're on YouTube, if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, follow me so that you can DM me. Right. And with that, that's my take on radical transparency, why I think radical transparency is important. We've gone past the hour. I want to thank everybody who's been with me from the beginning. It's really appreciated. And again, show your love for what it is that I'm doing on the channel. And until next time, remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.